As we mentioned in our last video, Seraphine didn't exactly surprise people the way Riot had hoped. Many players meme Seraphine as Sona 2.0, and the fact that she's launching with an ultimate skin didn't resonate with the community either. To Riot's credit, they were brave to take the risk of releasing an expensive skin for a new champion, because statistically the odds were in their favor, so I understand why they did it. Humanoid champions were always more popular than creatures. Female champions were usually a bit more popular than male champions. And KDA was massively popular. So it would only make sense to give this new attractive female champion a KDA skin. Now we'll just have to wait to see if it actually becomes a success. The reason why I started our lore video talking about Seraphine's development is because the way she was presented to us showed heavily on her lore. You see, when we are talking about Seraphine, we are really talking about two different characters. We have the KDA Seraphine, which comes from an alternative universe, and which is the character Riot tried to flesh out, to appeal to the audience and to, perhaps, even get people to buy her skin. That's why they even gave her a social media account. But then there is the canon Runeterra Seraphine, which is the one that is actually part of the lore. The problem with her is that it quickly became obvious that Riot first made the KDA Seraphine, and they first focused on the concept of her being a pop star that would inspire people, and after they had that nailed down, they then tried to make her fit into Runeterra. Which unfortunately, as you'll see in just a moment, in a universe that's being consumed by destructive power, greed and death from all sides, it is surprisingly hard to fit a bright-minded Disney princess pop star into that world. It is definitely not impossible. League of Legends certainly has bright-minded individuals that make your heart melt, but there is always a catch. For example, Nunu is a happy little kid, but he is oblivious to all the death around him. Or Braum, a lovable fellow who grew up in the deadly lands of Freljord, only to then help those in need to survive there as well. Seraphine, on the other side, doesn't really have a hero's journey. There is no catch, there is no real struggle, and there is no real journey at all. But that can be fixed in a future lore update. What Riot can't really fix now is her appearance. When I isolate her from her art, what's the first region that comes to your mind? Targon, isn't it? She has this glittering space design that doesn't really fit any other region. In fact, if this art was leaked without context, I would have thought that this was a Star Guardian skin. But the reality is that Seraphine is Piltover, despite the fact that nothing about her design tells us that she's from that region. Now you may be thinking that I am being too harsh, and that I am just being nitpicky, but I'm not the only one who thinks this. In fact, on Reddit people already started fixing her, and they already started redesigning her appearance to fit Piltover. And honestly, Riot, you need to do this. Just giving her a simple Piltover vest did so much for her. I understand you probably thought it would make sense to have Seraphine wear a flashy outfit, because she's a performer, but we are talking about Piltover and Zaun here. A place where homemade gadgets usually explode, people die, or they get stabbed by Cam Baron if they are too rich. Sometimes you also get stabbed simply if it helps another rich family. I don't think this is a place where anyone would bother with putting on a Lady Gaga outfit to stand out. But that's enough for the introduction. Now, let's have a look at Seraphine's bio, and let's see why people think that her Runeterra character was rushed. Massive thanks to Chibiin for providing Seraphine's model for this video. As we mentioned, Seraphine comes from the city of progress known as Piltover. As a child, Seraphine always loved music, especially her father's lullabies. The songs were beautiful, but sad, as were most Zaunite lullabies. The reason why her father sang her Zaunite songs was because both of Seraphine's parents were lifelong Zaunites, who moved up to Piltover where they hoped they could live a better life. Up there, their family had Hex Caustic's workshop, where they repaired broken sound equipment. But Seraphine wasn't really a mechanic, so instead she just leaned out the window and sang with the songs she heard in the streets. Be it the shanties of the Sun Gates, the whistling of apprentices, or even the melody of everyday conversation. As a fun fact, the Sun Gates are the massive structures at the bottom of the metropolis that separate Eastern and Western Valoran. Anyway, over time, Seraphine realized that she could hear songs others could not. It was almost as if these hidden songs came from the people around her. And over time, as she grew, so did the music in her head. Eventually, she heard every person's soul, loving or cruel, which turned the once loved music of the streets into an overwhelming tide of conflicting desires. Since the voices came from all kinds of people, none of them harmonized, and so she wondered how could she ever make sense of them. Some days, hopelessly, she hid shivering in a corner, hands over her ears, unable to hear herself above the chaos. After so many sacrifices, and after throwing away their Zaunite lives so Seraphine could be born in Piltover, her parents couldn't bear seeing their daughter struggle. So, scraping together their savings to purchase a shard of rare hextech crystal, they crafted a device that dampened her magical hearing. And suddenly, for the first time in years, there was silence. Within that silence, however, Seraphine heard something else. It turned out the crystal had consciousness, born of Breckern blood.
Hey! Listen!
Of course, all of this was explained in Camille's story. Simply summed up, very long time ago, Camille's family traveled to Shuriman dig sites, where they found hex crystals buried in the sand. These crystals were protected by strange crystallized scorpions, known as the Breckern. And so, to acquire these crystals and to bring them back to Piltover to kickstart the technological revolution, they had to sacrifice many limbs in fighting these monsters. What they didn't know, however, is that the hextech crystals contain the souls of the Breckern. When those scorpions die, they leave behind a small crystal that contains all of their memories, hopes and dreams. These crystals are then found by the younger Breckern, who take them, make them part of their body, and they continue the cycle of the Breckern hive mind. For some reason though, not only is Seraphine not shocked after learning that all the expensive technology in Piltover is powered up by the souls of an ancient race, but somehow the Breckern soul inside Seraphine's device was just chilling out, and it had nothing to say against the fact that humans turned their race into a small battery. Anyway, here is what the story says about the situation. The voice inside the crystal was kind. In a hymn of distant deserts and ancient conflicts of ancestors, 1,000 years of history sang in unison. Seraphine was awed by this song, and she asked the voice for guidance. Overwhelmed by the desires around her, she worried she may have no song of her own. What if she was only the voices of others? But the Breckern soul told her that they were all forged through others' voices. With its help, slowly she learned to manage the noise, and it helped Seraphine understand how to resonate with the crowd, to sing with them, using her dampener less each day. The first time she performed in front of an audience, testing her skills, she was nervous, but she kept singing, and the crowd swelled. Soon, the biggest venues in Piltover had Seraphine's fans spilling into the streets. Still, something was wrong. Something was missing in the crowds and in herself. She decided to seek perspective in the city her parents had worked so hard to leave. Zaun. The first time she rode the clanging lift down, which is the machine some of you may know under the Zaunite slang name, the Howler. Seraphine felt somehow at home, but still a stranger. In Zaun, she heard refrains of resilience and ambition much like above, yet with a thrum of freedom that was all their own. But as she spent more time below, she also sensed pain. Fear of the camp barons who controlled every opportunity. Hatred of the spoiled, arrogant Pilties above. There was so much conflict. She began to perform here, and she listened to those new crowds, their hearts singing their struggles. The two cities were divided by more than simple misunderstanding. Seraphine wanted to mend these people, to unite them, but she kept hearing the same sentence. It's not that simple in Zaun. Eventually, Piltover started to feel less like home. The voice of her hextech crystal had spoken of what hatred left unchecked could accomplish. Seraphine couldn't let that happen to the cities she loved. Asking her parents for help, they dismantled her dampener, and together they repurposed the crystal to power its opposite. A platform that would amplify her gifts, allowing her to hear others in all of their complexity. She rode this platform down as a stage of sorts, stepping out onto the Entersol between Piltover and Zaun. As the crowds gathered and the lights dazzled, she heard citizens from both cities mingled together to hear her. This was a new song, not just understanding, it was unity. It wasn't perfect, it might never be, but her voice mattered. And so Seraphine realized maybe she could help others find their voice too. Seraphine has become the premier star in both Piltover and Zaun. Empowered by her gifts and her hex tech, she amplifies the voices of all with a fresh force of optimism. Because to her, everyone matters, especially those who are struggling. They inspire her, and she will do the best to inspire them in return. And that was her story. I purposefully didn't rewrite the bio, or use different words to make the video format better. What you heard here is exactly what was written there. And maybe it's just me, but I have a couple of issues with this story. First of all, how exactly did she become famous in both cities so fast? The story never explained this. I assume that her songs got magically good after the help of the Breckern Soul, which for some reason was willing to help her, even though humans destroyed the entire Breckern race. But really, the story just says that she started singing, and people crowded around her. I mean, it is possible that she would be that good, but the story doesn't say anything. There is not a single word about her songs being charming or soothing. There is literally only one sentence at the end that says that she fills people with optimism. But that was after she already became a superstar, known by everyone in both cities, despite no one ever mentioning her. Next, I need to mention that there was absolutely no struggle in her story. At the start, as she grew up, she started hearing the voices in her head, which almost made her go insane. And I really like that part. Unfortunately, that issue never came back. Personally, I would love it if even now, as she was performing, she was just putting on a mask. So she would be trying to brighten people up with her songs, while she would secretly be going insane on the inside. Almost as if she would be sacrificing herself. But that's not the case. And our magical friendly Breckern Soul literally solved all of her problems. So in her story, she started low, but after that, everything just became better and more awesome, and suddenly she was a Star Guardian cosplaying pop star in a fantasy world. Speaking of which, if you really give her this shiny glittering outfit, please at least explain it in the story. There was absolutely no mention of how she got the flashy clothing. I'd really like to know who designed it or where she got it, especially after learning that her parents sold everything to even afford living in Piltover. And then they even bought the Hextech crystal. Where did she get money for this? Honestly, this would be a cool plot twist. And in fact, this is where the journey could start. We know that her family was poor at that point, and they were trying to pick themselves up. What if Seraphine started singing on the streets to get some money? That's where people would first start finding out about her, and that's how she would get famous. Right now, none of this is explained. Next, the story mentioned that one day while living in Piltover, she had a strange feeling, so she traveled to Zaun. I'd like to know what she felt was missing, because right now the story was like, something's wrong. I don't know what, but I'll surely find the answer in the rotting, smelly underbelly. Which, by the way, after spending some time in Zaun, seemingly for no reason, I don't understand why to her, Piltover started feeling less like home. Was there something in Zaun which Piltover didn't have? This is also something that the story just doesn't explain. Did she like the smell and the pain of that place? Is she secretly masochistic? I would actually like that as a plot twist. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like all the pieces of her good lore are there. They are just all over the place. I would like to know what it was like for her to put the dampener away for the first time in years. Did she get some flashbacks of insanity? I would like to know what the Breckern thinks about Seraphine. Don't tell me it literally just became friends with her. I would like to know what the Breckern meant when it was talking about unchecked hatred. Who was he referring to? The Breckern themselves being angry? The Piltovans digging out the crystals being angry? Or about the Rune Wars which woke the Breckern up? But that wasn't about hatred, that was all about power greed. And finally, I would like to know what are Seraphine's motivations. Right now, all the story mentioned is that she likes music. But liking music is no motivation to pull yourself from the brink of insanity, learn about the horrifying truth behind the hex crystals, and then pretend that everything is okay and that you just want to make people feel comfy. Usually, heroes are born after they witness something horrible. But Seraphine has not lived through anything bad. She had not even seen anyone die. In Zaun, out of all places. If her parents died, I would understand why she would be singing. She would want to prevent people from ever feeling like she had at that time. But even that didn't happen. In fact, even the fact that they were poor wasn't meaningful. So from the story's perspective, she feels bland to me because there is no reason for her to do what she does. She just doesn't have a motivation. So overall, there is so much potential here, but it really doesn't work. The story feels incomplete, which perhaps is worse than having bad but complete story. Yeah, good old Gragas. So after I was done with this video, I felt really bad because I thought I was being too harsh on Seraphine's lore. But then I noticed that I wasn't the only one by far who felt that way. I first watched TBSkyen's video on Seraphine, where he pretty much reflected the exact same opinion which I had. And then I saw Skooch's video, where he hilariously compared her actual Runeterran lore with all the KDA lore she got. And it is ridiculous how much more effort was put into the KDA version. In fact, her story in the alternative universe is still going on. Right now, as of me recording this, Seraphine literally just dyed her hair so she would have the blue color for the KDA skin. I mean, she didn't dye her hair, she does not exist. But it is so sad to see this disbalance between the two lores. On top of that, I have to say that the song covers which Seraphine released were actually really good. The music is great, so I really would have nothing to say against her if the same amount of effort was put into her Runeterran version, which should always be the main focus. This entire situation is just really sad now. And by the way, Skooch, if you're doing any percent speedrun of Seraphine's KDA lore, zoom out your browser to -200%. It will double up your scrolling speed.